Right after the lawyer finished reading my wife Darlene's will, my daughter-in-law Lexi leaned in close, her voice colder than the marble floor beneath us. "Your wife is dead. Be sad. Pack your things. Don't come back. For a moment." I thought I'd misheard her. Surely no one would speak like that. Not in a moment like this. But when I turned to my son, Jeremy, hoping, begging for a reaction, he said nothing. Not a word. Just silence. And in that silence, I understood I hadn't just lost my wife that day. I had lost my home, my family, maybe even my son. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My name's Richard Paulson. I'm 72 years old. For most of my life, I was a fire chief in a small Wisconsin town where everybody knew everybody. I wore that uniform for 33 years, the kind of job where you don't just clock in, you belong to the people. But if I'm honest, I belonged to one person more than anyone else. Her name was Darlene. We met when I was 24 and she was 20. She used to come into the firehouse with her older sister who worked in admin. Darlene had these calm, thoughtful eyes, and a way of listening that made you feel like every word mattered. We got married 2 years later, bought a modest house just off Maple Street, the kind with creaky stairs and a yard full of stubborn dandelions. And over the next 45 years, we built something not flashy but real, steady, solid. A life. Darlene loved her flower beds and budgeting things down to the cent. I was the kind of guy who'd bring home 2 of something just in case. She'd laugh and say, "Well, now we've got enough for next year too." We had our rhythm. Every Sunday we'd walk to the bakery. Every spring we repainted the front steps. When Jeremy was born, that rhythm changed, but only in the best way. He was our only child. A quiet boy with his mother's patience and my stubborn streak. I used to toss him up on my shoulders and march around the station like he owned the place. He loved the sirens, hated the gear. As he got older, the 3 of us were close. Not perfect, no family is, but there were traditions. 4th of July barbecues, Friday meatloaf nights, fishing trips that always ended in tangled lines and laughter. Darlene was the glue. She managed the finances, made sure bills were paid, saved coupons like it was a sport. When she suggested transferring the deed of the house into Jeremy's name just for inheritance purposes. Rich. You know how messy things get? I didn't argue. I trusted her. She said it was just paperwork. Then Lexi came along. Jeremy met her after college. She was polite. Sure. Always said thank you. Never raised her voice. But there was something chilly under the surface, like she was always looking past us. Darlene tried, bless her. Invited her to garden, to cook. Lexi would smile but never stay long. Over time. Our dinners got shorter, calls from Jeremy got fewer, birthdays became texts. Still, I didn't question it. Families drift. I told myself, people get busy. Besides, Darlene never stopped believing in the good. Maybe I leaned too much on that faith. Maybe I didn't see what she saw. Darlene passed on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun crept across the kitchen floor. It had been a long road, and toward the end. Even the smallest breaths had become a battle. I was holding her hand when she let go. No drama, no last words, just a quiet surrender, like a flame going out with a soft breath of wind. I sat with her for hours afterward, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I didn't want to stop being her husband just yet. We kept the funeral simple, just as she would have wanted. A small chapel, soft piano music, and garden roses, fresh ones, the kind she used to trim even when her hands trembled. Folks from the firehouse came in full dress, standing straight-backed and teary-eyed. Jeremy gave a short eulogy. He kept it neat, polished, not a crack in his voice. And Lexi, well, she looked more annoyed by the cold weather than moved by the service. She kept checking her phone, her thumb twitching like she was waiting for a dinner reservation to pop up. Still, I stayed quiet. Grief has a way of turning every noise inside you into static. The day came and went in a blur of condolences. Lukewarm casseroles and half-meant promises to keep in touch. I slept in the guest room that night. The master bedroom felt too loud with its emptiness. A week later, we gathered for the will reading at a small law office tucked between a diner and an antique shop. I wore my old navy blue suit, pressed, polished. The same one I wore when we bought the house. Jeremy and Lexi were already seated when I walked in. The lawyer, a young man with tired eyes, read through the formalities. Everything was as expected until it wasn't, when the document shifted to property, to deeds and trusts. I noticed Lexi sit up straighter. Her eyes flicked to Jeremy, then to me, and that's when she leaned forward, placed both hands flat on the table, and said in a voice colder than any winter I'd known, "Your wife is dead. Be sad. Pack your things. Don't come back." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Surely no one speaks like that. Not to a man who just buried his wife of 45 years. But Jeremy didn't flinch. He didn't object. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the table like the wood grain was telling a story more interesting than this one. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I stood, straightened my jacket, and picked up the canvas duffel I'd brought just in case. No keepsakes, no photographs, just a few shirts, some socks, and a toothbrush. I walked out without a sound. I didn't even close the door behind me. Outside. The wind bit through my coat. I stood on the curb and watched the light in the lawyer's office dim behind me. People passed, unaware that a whole life had just come undone in a sentence. I wasn't just grieving my wife. I was grieving the home we built, the son we raised, the quiet mornings, and the shared routines. All of it swept aside like clutter in a room being redecorated. They say you die twice. Once when your heart stops, and once when they pack your things into a box and pretend you were never there. I had been a fire chief, a husband, a father, but in that moment, I was something else entirely, an unwanted guest in my own life. I spent the first 2 nights at a roadside motel just off the highway. The kind with floral curtains, a humming ice machine, and a window that looked out onto nothing. I didn't sleep much, just lay on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me. My bag sat on the armchair, half-zipped, because what else do you take when your life gets swept off the table in a sentence I called Jeremy the second night? Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say that hadn't already been said in the silence between us the next morning? I got a text. It wasn't from my son. It was from Lexi, just a line, "We're going to repaint. Please get your things soon." No greeting, no punctuation, just instructions like I was a tenant whose lease had expired. I stared at that message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at this motel desk, pulled out the small leather notebook I used back in the firehouse, and started writing down what I remembered. Not legal things memories. The time Jeremy ran through the sprinkler in his pajamas. The afternoon Darlene cried when her mother's old music box stopped working, and how I spent hours fixing it, even though I didn't know a thing about music boxes. I wrote it all down like I was afraid the motel walls might erase it if I didn't. By Friday, I made my way back to the house. I didn't go inside. I stood across the street, watching from under the old maple tree. There were painters in the front yard. 2 men with rollers and buckets, covering up the porch Darlene painted blue every spring. She always said it looked like sky under our feet. Now it was beige. Safe. Bland beige. The kind that sells better on listings. That's when it hit me. They were selling it. Not just repainting it. Erasing it. I crossed the street, walked up to the mailbox, ours, still labeled the Paulsons, and opened it. Nothing inside. Not a letter. Not even junk mail. Just hollow metal. Back at the motel, I dug through the side pocket of my bag, looking for the fleece Darlene always made me bring on trips. Even summer ones. "You'll get cold," she'd say. I unfolded it, and something slipped out of the inner lining, an old envelope, yellowed at the edges. Inside was the original blueprint of our home. I didn't even remember stashing it there. Must have been years ago. The paper was soft from time, but the ink was still sharp. Every line drawn by Darlene's uncle, a draftsman. Her handwritten notes were still there, "To pantry here. Window must face east." I stared at that blueprint like it was a love letter. That night, I slept with it folded across my chest like armor. The next morning, another message from Lexi. "If you don't come get your things, we'll assume you don't want them." I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black. In the quiet, I could hear Darlene's voice, gentle but firm, rich. "Sometimes you protect peace by walking away, not by fighting." She used to say that when I'd get worked up about council meetings or budget cuts. Back then, I thought it was just her way of smoothing my fire chief edges. Now, it felt like something else. A kind of wisdom she'd tucked into me for this exact moment, that afternoon. I drove to the Goodwill on Elm and bought a second-hand suitcase. I returned to the house one last time. Not to plead, not to confront, but to gather. The spare bedroom door was locked. My name scratched off the closet in permanent marker. I didn't ask who did it. I packed what I could carry: 2 cardigans, a photo album, the firehouse plaque, and the wooden jewelry box Darlene kept her wedding ring in whenever she gardened. The bedroom smelled like lavender and old dust. I stood in the center for a long time, taking in every crack in the ceiling, every nick in the dresser. On the way out, I left the spare key on the kitchen table, not out of politeness, just because I didn't want it in my pocket anymore. As I stepped onto the porch, I looked back one final time. The curtains were gone. The sky blue had been swallowed by beige. The swing was missing. Have you ever been treated unfairly by your own family? Share your experience in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it. I went to the bank on a Tuesday. The kind of errand no one teaches you how to do, closing your wife's account after 45 years of shared groceries, birthday surprises, and little transfers for just because flowers. Her name was still on the checks, still on the online login, still in the corner of the debit card I carried like a piece of her heartbeat. The teller was young, soft-spoken, and a little too cheerful for the task. I handed her the death certificate, her driver's license, and tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "I need to settle my wife's account." She nodded politely and tapped at her keyboard, the screen reflecting in her glasses. Then she paused. "One moment. Mr. Paulson." She disappeared into the back, where fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of forgotten safety deposit boxes. I waited with my hands folded and eyes fixed on the wood grain of the desk, tracing it like a map to somewhere I used to know. She returned holding a small, cream-colored envelope. "This was left with us a while ago. Mrs. Paulson said to give it to you if anything happened." My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable, her cursive. The way she curled the R in my name, like it was a secret she didn't want the world to know. I nodded, took it with both hands like it might break. Back at the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for a long time. The seal was intact. The kind we used on Christmas cards and letters to Jeremy at summer camp. My hands shook as I peeled it open. Inside was a folded letter and 2 documents. One was a trust agreement. The other was a notarized deed. The name on the property was mine. The letter was short. "Richard, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead. Don't argue. I know you hate that phrasing, but you always said I was better with soft landings. I knew how Lexi looked at me. I saw how Jeremy drifted away. I didn't want to burden you with worry, so I took care of what I could quietly. There's a cabin in Montana, Flathead Lake. You remember the one we saw on that road trip? The one you joked about retiring to with nothing but fishing poles and blackberry pie? I bought it. Rich. I bought it in your name. There's a trust attached. The bank manager has all the instructions. Just go, rest, heal. Let the mountains carry some of this for you. And remember, just because they forgot who you are doesn't mean you have to. Love you always. Darlene." I didn't cry right away. I sat there with the paper in my lap, the edge fluttering from the ceiling fan, and felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but something sturdier than grief, something like being seen, even after goodbye. I looked up Montana on my phone. Flathead Lake. Photos of pine trees. Water so still it looked like sky. And cabins tucked between hills like secrets waiting to be found. She had seen the storm coming and built me a raft before I even knew I was drowning. And for the first time since she passed, I felt like I could breathe. The cabin sat nestled between 2 ridges of tall pine and silence. It took me nearly 2 days to drive from Kansas to Montana, and another hour on a dirt road that hadn't seen tire marks in a long time. But the directions were precise, just like Darlene. At the final turn. There it was, small, weathered, beautiful. The kind of place you'd never think to look for unless someone whispered it into your ear and meant every syllable. My name was on the deed, etched into paper that the lawyer in Missoula confirmed had been finalized 3 years before her diagnosis. The front door creaked like it was welcoming me home. The floors were pine, still sturdy, and the place smelled faintly of cedar and dried flowers. There wasn't much furniture, just a rocking chair by the window, a modest kitchen, and a fireplace framed by stone. On the mantel sat a photograph I hadn't seen in years, the 2 of us at Lake Chelan, her hair wind-blown, my mustache too long, both of us laughing mid-bite into melted ice cream cones. She'd packed this place with memory, not luxury. The bedroom had a quilt folded over the end of the bed. I knew the stitching. Darlene's mother taught her. On the nightstand was a small wooden box, the lid carved with initials R+D. I opened it. Inside were both our wedding rings. Mine. which I hadn't worn since the swelling started in my knuckles. Hers, with a small chip on the band from when it caught on the garden gate years ago. Beneath the rings, a note in her handwriting. The ink soft but sure. If this ring found you, it means you made it. You're safe. Let go now. Rich. That's when I broke, for the first time since she passed. I let it out. Not a man's stoic kind of cry, no. This was shaking shoulders and ragged breath, and a sound I didn't recognize coming from myself. I held that note like it was her hand, and I whispered thank you into the empty room like she could still hear me. A few days later, I met with the lawyer she'd arranged through a trust firm. His briefcase was worn, his eyes kind. He explained everything over coffee on the cabin's porch. Years before her health turned, Darlene had begun quietly moving equity and savings into this trust, this cabin. The contents, and enough investments to see me through the rest of my life. Jeremy, it turned out, had borrowed against the old house $70,000. It was leveraged without my name on the deed. Of course, and when Darlene realized how much risk he'd taken, she acted. She made sure the house would never be used against me. She had tied the equity to a clause that returned liability to Jeremy alone after her death. It was legal poetry. The kind of move that doesn't roar, it whispers. And that whisper echoes. She never told me, never burdened me with it. She just let me live our days in peace. I thought I'd lost everything. But what she left me wasn't just property or money, it was clarity, a place to start again, a quiet answer to the loud betrayal. That night, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the sky went from gold to lavender, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, the note in one hand and our rings in the other. I realized she had never truly left. Not really. She had just gone ahead to set the table, warm the room, and make sure there was a light on when I finally arrived. I was trimming the edge of the gravel path when my phone rang. The number was familiar, the kind that once meant birthday calls or holiday check-ins. I let it buzz 4 times before I answered. Dad. Jeremy's voice was tight, hurried. We need to talk. I kept my voice even. What about... There was a pause. Then, the house. The trust. We didn't know about the way she structured things. We thought... You thought wrong, I said. Not with anger, but with the kind of steadiness that comes after you've been hollowed out and filled again with something stronger. Lexi says we're locked out of refinancing, he went on. And that your name, it's on the cabin. That's where the money went. I waited. Let the wind speak for me while he stumbled through his panic. We didn't mean for things to go this far, he added. We thought honestly, Dad. We thought you'd be okay with just moving out. We didn't think she'd hide money from us. I looked out over the lake. A heron was perched on a rock. Motionless. I found myself envying its quiet. I wasn't supposed to need protecting. I said, not from my own son. Jeremy's breath hitched. Come on, it's not like that. But it is. I said, you didn't stand up for me when your wife told me to leave the house your mother and I built. You sat there, silent. That silence. That was the first nail. He tried again. Voice cracking now. Look, we're sorry. Okay, we were overwhelmed. Lexi thought we had to act fast. Maybe we should have talked to you more, but please, can we just fix this? I didn't answer right away. I remembered Darlene's letter, her quiet planning. The way she never once asked for recognition, just made sure I had something when the rest fell away. You already did. Jeremy, I said, and my voice surprised even me with how steady it was. You already broke something I can't glue back. There was a long silence on the line, then just a quiet. I see. And then he hung up. That week. Lexi's messages started to come. Long texts about confusion, paperwork, how none of this made sense, how they were blindsided. One even started with, "You know, we were just trying to protect our future." I didn't reply. The lawyer handled it from there. The trust held. The debt against the house was now theirs to manage. And I, for the first time in a long time, had nothing I needed to explain or defend. At night, I sat with Darlene's ring in my hand. Her words echoed in me not like a ghost, but like a hymn you hum when you're finally alone and the world stops demanding answers. And somehow, in all that silence, I finally heard myself again. The porch faced west, just the way Darlene liked it. In the late afternoon, the light came in soft and gold, brushing across the hills and making the lake below shimmer like a secret. I sat in the old rocking chair, the one I found in the cabin's attic, and sanded down myself, and held her ring in the middle of my palm. It was warm from my skin, small and familiar in a way nothing else was anymore. That morning, I'd planted her favorite zinnias in a narrow bed along the porch rail. Red, pink, a stubborn yellow, one or two. She used to say they reminded her of summer when things were loud and alive. Even when we were old and the house got quiet. The soil was good up here. Rich. It crumbled right in your fingers like cake. I talked to her as I planted, even if I never said so out loud. I think she heard me. There was no big ending, no courtroom standoff, no raised voices or slammed doors, just paperwork sent through a lawyer, and silence returned where the noise used to be. Jeremy didn't call again. Neither did Lexi. I suppose they were busy figuring out how to untangle the mess they'd walked into, trying to make sense of the house and the trust they never even knew existed until it was too late. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove a point. The silence was enough. Some things don't need shouting to be remembered. Some losses echo louder without a sound. I looked over at the empty chair beside me. Darlene's shawl still hung over it, just the way she used to leave it in our old sunroom back home. I don't know why I brought it, but maybe I do. It made the chair feel less empty, the kind of trick you play on yourself when your heart wants company. You always knew what I needed, I said quietly, watching the steam curl up from my mug, even when I didn't. The wind rustled through the trees, not enough to answer, but just enough to make me feel heard. There are days I still ache, that doesn't go away. But I also know this cabin this small. Stubborn place, carved out of trees, and time is mine now, because she made sure it would be. Because love doesn't always come with grand gestures or flowery speeches. Sometimes it comes in the form of a trust no one else knows about, a letter left behind, a blueprint folded inside an old jacket, a ring in a box that says, "If this found you, it means you made it." And I did. I made it. If this story touched you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow the next stories I'll share from this porch. And let me ask you, if it were you, could you forgive your child? You always knew what I needed, even when I didn't. If this story touched you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow the next stories we tell here. And tell me, If it were you, could you forgive your child